This podcast is presented by the Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
Hi, I'm Hawa.
I'm Heather.
I'm Hannah.
And this is our podcast, These Books Made Me. Today we're going to be talking about Beezus and Ramona and Ramona Forever by Beverly Cleary. Friendly warning as always, this podcast contains spoilers. If you don't know which pair of siblings digs a little grave, proceed with caution. We have a special guest here with us today.
Hi, I'm Audrey, and I'm a librarian at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. What did this book or these books, this pair of books, mean to you?
I have really vivid memories of reading all of the Beverly Cleary books when I was a very small child. The Ramona books, the Ralph books, the Ribsy books, just all of them. I loved them when I was little. I feel like I'm definitely a Beezus and not a Ramona. I felt very seen by these books, and I feel like the books that then end up focusing more on Ramona maybe helped me understand my brother a little bit better and develop more empathy for how it would be to be the younger sibling in a family.
I guess I identify more with Beezus than Ramona, but there's a little bit of Ramona in me. I think what I love about the books is just how genuinely funny they were. I discovered Ramona when I was on summer vacation with my grandparents, and I was home alone not home alone, but with them by myself without my parents. My aunt actually introduced these to me, and it was a book she said reminded her of her childhood. But when I read them, Ramona was a bit wilder than I was. She was more like my sister, and I was more like Beezus. But this book reminds me of my wild 1980s childhood of, kind of being very largely outside and unsupervised. Our fears and our adventures are just our own. My sister was my Ramona. I grew up wanting to be like Ramona, but also more like my sister, because she was brave and constantly meeting these roles and anxieties head on. And that was, what I wanted to be more like her.
I remember the titles. I don't remember a lot of what I read growing up. If y'all listen frequently, you've probably heard me say that before. Rereading them, the storylines didn't sound familiar, but the titles definitely, like Ramona and Beezus, Ramona Forever. Those books stood out to me with the Judy Moody books and the Junie B. Jones books, all those kind of little bratty character. It reminds me of titles that I'd heard of, but don't necessarily remember.
You did a little bit of research on Beverly Cleary. Audrey, you want to tell us what you found out?
Sure. Beloved children's literature author and librarian Beverly Cleary was born over a century ago in McMinnville, Oregon, in 1916, and spent her early years on a family farm in Yamhill before moving with her family to Portland, Oregon. She died just last year in March at the age of 104. During her long life, she would publish over 40 critically acclaimed books that were translated into multiple languages and would change the landscape of children's literature. In 2000, the Library of Congress dubbed her as a living legend for her accomplishments. As a young child, Cleary was designated by her school as having low reading skills. She would catch up and become an avid reader by the third grade, which is a nice reminder that is not necessary for a child to be reading fluently and at extremely young age in order to develop strong reading skills and take pleasure in reading. Cleary would later work as a children's librarian. While talking to children about the books they wanted to read, she perceived a gap in what was available to children to read about, and that was portrayals of realistic childhood, the emotional life of children, and humor. Cleary set out to write the books that she felt were missing from the shelves and that she would have liked to read herself. The New York Times has a luminous quote about Cleary's writing. This was Cleary's great gift, the ability to map the strange Newtonian physics of childhood, its bizarro laws of proportion and gravity, its warped space-time. She loved especially the spots where kids' inner worlds, urgent, intimate, and self-evident, conflicted with the outer world of adults, cold, foreign, and often arbitrary. Cleary understood that to a child, 30 minutes often feels like 30 years, and that small setbacks can feel like an apocalypse. The irrepressible Ramona Quimby and her lens onto the landscape of childhood made her relatable to both children who saw themselves in her and adults who remembered what it was like to be small, full of energy, and struggling to understand the mysterious world of the adults who run it.
All right, we are going to dive into our first book, which is Beezus and Ramona. So we're going to sort of bookend this series more or less with the canonical run of the original books. Beezus and Ramona is the first one. And in that book, 9-year-old Beatrice Beezus Quimby and her 4-year-old sister Ramona live in Portland with their mother and father on Klickitat Street. Beezus and Ramona are as different as two sisters can be. Beezus is responsible and straight-laced, while Ramona is rambunctious and mischievous. Over the course of the book, Ramona, much to the horror of Beezus, destroys a library book, rides her tricycle in the house, locks a dog in the bathroom, melts her beloved doll, and throws an impromptu neighborhood house party. Beezus is at the end of her rope after Ramona ruins not one but 2 birthday cakes. The adults help Beezus accept that you can love your sibling, even if you don't really like them sometimes. Obviously, this one is huge on sibling dynamics. So how well do you all think that it captured sibling dynamics?
I think that there's this whole thing with your siblings. The way they word it is you don't always love your siblings, but to me, the way I've always thought about it is like, you may not like your siblings sometimes, but you love your siblings, and they captured that very well.
I have a literal memory of sitting on the couch, I think trying to read, and my sister, who was too young to read, was like, come play with me. And she's like yelling at me to try to play with her. And I'm like, go away, leave me alone. Like, it felt like the opening scene where, I don't remember what Beezus is trying to do, like potholder or something. It's very similar roles.
And then also, like, they did a really good job at like showing how bratty she was and how she just had to have her way, and how you think of all the different clever ways to kind of like find your own peace, but, you know, meet the needs of your sibling. Like how she was so tired of reading that steam shovel book that she took her to the library just for her to find the big steam shovel book.
Yeah.
But I do think that these got a lot right about sisterhood, not just the dynamic of tension, how much your siblings kind of inspire you. Beatrice is constantly kind of tacking to every Ramona adventure. And it really, the interplay between the two. Beezus is, this is how I want my day to go. And Ramona is like, hold on a second.
Ramona's 4. And I know people say the terrible 2s when they're talking about kids as being like the roughest age. That was not my experience as a parent. 4 is the toughest age. Because when they're 2, they're toddlers, right? Like, they can't do a lot of things. And they get frustrated, and you get it. But when they're 4, they can do a lot of things. They're like right on the edge of being able to do a lot of things themselves. And so they want to do everything themselves, but then it goes terribly. And like Audrey was saying, I think that there is some amount of inspiration that siblings get off of each other. The younger one wants to be more like the grown-up one because they can do all of these things that they're not allowed to do or they're not able to do. And they seem so together compared to how the little one is feeling in the moment. Beezus wants to be more like Ramona in a lot of ways. She wants to have more imagination and be more free. She's a planner. She's cautious. She's very responsible. And she can see that like Ramona has this sort of overwhelming level of energy and enthusiasm and gusto. And she just kind of lives her life full tilt. And there's that scene when they're at the painting class. The teacher keeps saying, like, let your imagination run wild. And Beezus is just so constrained initially by wanting to do it right. Whereas Ramona just kind of does whatever she wants. And eventually Beezus does get that inspiration from Ramona because she ends up painting Ramona's imaginary lizard that she has drug around the string to bring it to class with them. So Beezus finally gets that recognition from her teacher because she has sort of been able to emulate Ramona at this one time. She uses her as a source of inspiration, which I thought was really great because I think that's really true to sibling dynamics. My little brother made me crazy when I was a kid, but very much like Ramona, he was the bigger personality. Like he was extroverted. To me, I'd get frustrated because it was like, oh gosh, he's just doing that to get attention sort of thing. Like Beezus thinks Ramona's doing a lot of the time. But at the same time, you do sort of glom onto that. It's like, wow, I wish I could do that. Like I wish I wasn't held back by wanting to do the right thing or do it the right way. And you do envy that freedom the other person has. And so I think even when a relationship is fraught, there is that element there. And she captures that really well.
I think it comes from being the oldest. There's a sense of responsibility that's impressed upon you. You know the rules at this point, and you've been given care of this little person who is following you around. But I'm sure there was this conversation, make sure your sister doesn't get into trouble. You're going to go to the park. And I just know that my sister had all of the freedom. Like there was always that she could get away with everything. And I think that the episode with the apples for me was just, there was a moment in our childhood where my sister found the cookies in the cabinet and proceeded to eat the middle out of all of them and put them back. My mom went to get a cookie and she fell open and there's a little teeth mark that had scraped the stuffing out of the cookie. And my sister was very happy with herself and believed no one would find out about this at all, despite the fact that she put the evidence back in the cupboard. And, but I would never have been able to get away with that in my mind. But I really envied her.
I mean, it's like Ramona said, the first bite is the best.
Right.
The cream inside of the cookie is the best.
And then they just decided, they were just like, we're not going to make a big deal out of it. We're just going to make a ton of applesauce.
Which comes in handy when the millions come over to the house unannounced.
It does seem like, though, and this may be something that maybe speaks more to like the time when this book came out. Also, I don't know when this book came out. When did this book come out?
I think this was like 55.
As kids, they seem like more free than you would think that they would be now, just because they tell her, okay, well, you can go to your painting class. Your sister's going to be in the sandbox. Is the painting class not inside and the park outside? Like, how is she watching her if she's watching her painting, right? Ramona went free one time and the police had to bring her back. And I'm just like, if that happened today, there'd be a lot more than just the police bringing you back. Like, there's definitely going to be like an investigation. Like, is this child neglect for you letting your child get this far? That was something that stood out to me.
Welcome to the Wild West of our childhood.
Yeah.
And you look on that, I think, and realize that we were really given a lot of freedom. It's something that you only appreciate now, like as an adult, when you're stuck in the library on a really beautiful day and the kids fly by on their bikes. But that is definitely like not something that happens today. And it's almost something that I think you feel kind of sorry for those kids who don't have that kind of moment of kind of sheer joy.
Oh, absolutely.
So I have to go back to the apple incident for a second just to share. My sister, when she was a toddler, took one bite out of each tomato on my mother's tomato vine. My mom thought it was the birds until she saw Lucy like walk up and like just chomp it off the vine with no hands.
It's funny that she did it in front of your mom.
She had no shame. She's like, I'm just doing this.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, it's just such well done observational writing. She really, really captures the way that children are. These all seem like familiar incidents for any of us. Like we can think of moments in our childhood where a sibling did something similar, where we did something similar. One of the things that I love about these books is she understands how the sounds of words or the feel of words in your mouth can be just intensely pleasurable. So you have all of these little incidents with Ramona making sound effects, or like even down to like the name that she picks for her dolls, right? She has Bendix, she has Chevrolet and other books. That joy about like the taste, the feel of certain words on the tongue. And her books are just littered with words like that. So there's this like real musicality, I think, to the way that she writes. There's lots of sound effects. There's lots of just funny words or little rhymes that are kind of snuck in here and there, where she's really playing with how language works in a way that when you're a little kid and when you're learning to read and you're first like really diving into big chapter books and you've sort of lost the illustrations and stuff, this is the kind of writing I feel that really draws you in, because it's what lets you know that language is pleasurable in a way that you don't get when you're doing like EFBs. So like Dr. Seuss would be sort of the precursor to this, but most early reading books are not like that. They don't have this sort of like sense of joy in the language, I don't think. So it's a really nice, distinctive writing style that she has. And I think it's part of why the books hold up so well, because there's no time tied to that. Like language is fun and beautiful forever. So like as long as you have that appreciation of it in the text, I think that it holds up pretty well.
Well, as we know, Bendix is the most beautiful name in the world, according to Ramona.
It is. She's sadly not the most beautiful doll in the world anymore. After her trip into the oven.
Poor Bendix.
But honestly, I mean, for those of us who had a reliable doll that went with us, I can count maybe once or twice where my doll was actually clean. I mean, that doll went with me everywhere. It even had Band-Aids, when I had Band-Aids. So, I mean, it's one of those moments that your doll went everywhere with you. So why wouldn't they want to go into the oven at some point and as your proxy, I guess? I don't know. I know that my childhood doll eventually went away. I'm not really entirely sure of the consequences, but she was well loved. And I think that's one of those things that I've really come to appreciate when I see a lovey or a stuffy of a child. The name is always important. And mine, for the record, her name was Baby Custard, EERCYC. No memory of what any of that meant.
I have a vivid memory of my oldest daughter. Her favorite 2 dolls at that time was a baby doll that was named Mama Baby, and then this rabbit doll that she named Ty Martin. And she was supposed to be napping one day, and it was awfully quiet in there. And so I went to check on her. And Ty Martin was a white rabbit. Cora had gotten out all of the markers and had decided Ty Martin should be rainbow colored. And she had colored Ty Martin to the degree that there was no longer any white left on him. But even just picking him up, he was wet with the marker juice. But it's and to her, it was she just had made him so beautiful.
Right.
Not I ruined my doll,
She enhanced him.
Exactly. She just gave him a glow up and he was ready to go.
Children are so wholesome in that way. It's funny, though. Ramona was probably thinking, okay, cool. I'm going to read a different story to her. This is going to be fine, And then she's probably regretting reading that story to her so badly when she realized it ruined her birthday cake.
Well, because she did Hansel and Gretel with Bendix, right?
Yes.
Right.
Should have been some foreshadowing there.
Which was why she went in the oven.
If you read a Grimm's fairy tale, it's going to introduce some dark concepts into the world.
I just, again, want to comment on some of the, Beverly Cleary as just having a really great sense of observation or turn of phrase at times. So the Bendix is the most beautiful name in the world. There was the whole thing with the harmonica, and she's riding around with her harmonica, just kind of sighing in and out of it. And the way that Cleary describes it is, this made the harmonica sound as if it were groaning, "Oh dear, oh dear," over and over again. And it's so spot on. That's exactly what a harmonica being played poorly sounds like. But just lots of these things. So about the Scoopy book, just oh God, we've read Scoopy so many times. And everyone can feel that in their bones, we've all been there where it's the 82nd time someone wants you to read them that same book that's not even very good.
Or the parents who hide it. They take it, they take
I
it
don't
away
know
from
where
you.
Scoopy went.
I loved the train from Timbuktu to Kalamazoo. And the great part about it was that you just had to swap out the place names, and go back the journey the other way. And oh my gosh, that book disappeared. And I loved that book. It just went through each town and then you could come back again. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And my parents...
Not so much.
Yeah. No, my brother's Scoopy was a book called Pano the Train. He lost his caboose. So he would go around and everybody would be like, you've lost. And he thought he was in a race, but he had just lost his caboose. So the whole book is people going, you've lost. And I remember reading that to my brother so many times and being like, I hope this book burns in a fire. I hated it so much at that point. So they
basically were calling him a loser the whole book.
That's what he thought. So he's like, I have to go faster. I don't want to lose. Oh.
I think this book did a really good job at making us realize how annoying Ramona was. I was literally reading all her antics and I'm just like, does she ever stop? And then I remembered, this is what having a toddler or, I guess a little bit above a toddler, sibling is like. Also, I think that it was very cute how upset Beezus was when she thought that she was never going to be able to go back to the library again. She was so distraught. She's like,
yes,
now I can't go to the library and I'll just be stuck at home with Ramona. What am I going to do? And her mom's just like, it's okay. I'll just give you the money and you can just pay for the book. And, whatever. So she takes it. They go to the library. They pay for the book. The librarian's like, yeah, it's just, this much. She's like, okay, well, now you get to keep it. Beezus is like, oh, no, now I have to keep reading this book to her. And then the librarian's like, well, actually, Ramona, it's not your book because you don't have a library card. And Beezus is like, it's my book. I thought that was the funniest thing. Also, that was a pretty cheap library book, but also this was like the 50s probably.
It was the 50s, so that actually seems like a lot of money for a library
right.
book. Like $250 is a lot, and there's that moment where Beezus says like, "Oh, what an awful lot of things that money could have bought." So another thing I think that Beverly Cleary does really well is capture childhood anxiety.
Absolutely.
I felt that one in my bones too, where it was like that was the kind of thing as a kid I worried about money all the time because we didn't have a lot when I was this age. And one of the things that would just like rile me up about my younger brother was he had no concept of money. Like he'd ask for things that I was just like, we can't afford that I would never have asked for, you know, even if he didn't get it. And so the book, I felt like really encapsulated that. Like Ramona did what she wanted. She signed her name on every single page of the book. And now it created this mess that Beezus has to clean up and then like pay for the book. And then Ramona's going to get rewarded for it by like, now the book belongs to you. But I thought that the like librarian handled that really well. And I think that the librarian, this is a nice book for librarians. We've had some not so great librarians in our books before this one. And this was very pro-librarian. The children's librarian was awesome.
I was going to say, the children's library was awesome. The other librarian, they were just like, oh, I wish the children's librarian was here. She could help us find a book.
The adult librarian was mean. It was implied.
Yeah, she was like sitting there glaring at them because Ramona was too loud.
I was fascinated by the library scenes. Like, I love that, like, the criterion, apparently, to get a card is being able to sign your name. And I'm like, wait, that's, you know, and you see Ramona trying so hard to sign her name, but she's 4, so she can't. So she's like, we would never ask that
right,
question.
And it's just
now,
like, why aren't her
think.
parents here with her while she's signing up for this card? And then she's taking out all these things. Well, luckily she didn't get the card, but it's just like, was it because she was with her older sister? Is that why she just let it slide? Also, she's 9, so she's still a child. Like,
yeah, it was.
They're barely old enough to be in the library by themselves, but that was a different time.
It's an odd window into like a possible way that people could have gotten cards, because I'm assuming it's pulled slightly from reality since she was a children's librarian.
Right.
It's very different than how we would do it now, probably.
Only us as librarians would have this much analysis into the libraries of this book.
True.
She only did I's and T's, I think.
Right.
Because she was used to seeing people dot and cross.
Which her name had neither.
Nope, not one. But that was true, too, because, like, I remember when I was a kid and I was jealous of friends that had names that started with certain letters that I thought were way cooler than mine, like in cursive.
I feel that.
You've got signature envy. Well, you're an H too.
Yeah.
Like, didn't you ever like look at the people that had like a cool starting letter, like a Z or an L, and you're like,
or
oh,
an S? You know,
I wish
the
I could
S's
do
could
this
be nice
curly,
and curvy.
like-
And then on top of that, my name is also really short. So like my name's only 4 letters. So like even like when I get my name tags made for work, I put my first name and my last initial because just my first name just looks so short. Like.
I remember getting my first library card, but I don't remember having to write my name. I think it was just a matter of the frustration of only being able to have 2 books at the school library and complaining to my parents. My dad's like, let's take care of this. And we went to the library and we were able to check out, I think it was like 5, and I thought I had won the lottery. But I can't imagine going to the library and having to see the librarian and say, my sister wrote on this book. I would be mortified.
No, that would have been the worst.
I just put in a book drop.
Yeah. I felt so bad for Beezus at that moment because, I can't imagine.
It's like, why do I have to be the one to explain?
Right.
You're the adult. Can't you just come do this? Like,
Yeah.
But at the same point, isn't it like Heather was saying about, you know, not having a lot of money? I know that having books when we were kids was a big deal and you didn't have a lot that were your own. Well, this is like an instruction manual of like how to get your own library book. Step 1, use a purple crayon. Step 2, write very big on every page. Gets a yellow caution from, you know, because who knew you could own it if you just wrote in it and, you know, so maybe we shouldn't keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, we probably shouldn't. And we still have that as like a policy that if you have to buy it, you can keep the like bought copy because, well, you just paid for it. But Beezus was right. The quote from the book was, if she spoils a book, she shouldn't get to keep it. Now, every time she finds a book she likes, she'll... And it's like she can't go on because she realizes, oh no, we've given her the roadmap to forming your own library collection via destruction.
The ego there. I mean, it's like when she gets in trouble for the ruining the game and, you know, at some point she gets a cookie and then the dog ends up locked in the bathroom. And it was like, once you figure out how that whole situation resolves, it's like, the dog ate my cookie. I will punish him because the only power I have as a little person is to do this. And it was like all of the feels.
Well, it's how she gets punished too, right? Like, you were bad, go to your room.
And Ramona's whole worry about this is, now that the dog's locked in the bathroom, I'm not worried about the dog. My friend could be worried about his dog. I'm worried about the fact that now we'll have to use the bathroom and we'll have nowhere to go. Like, she's 9 years old and worried about all these, like, important things.
No, and then she did immediately have to, like, pee, and her mom had to take her to the neighbor.
Right.
I said Ramona, but I meant Beezus. Beezus was the one that was worried about, where are we going to be able to use the bathroom? Also, can we talk about how Ramona just threw her own party?
Yep. She invited the whole neighborhood, too. It was like, what did they say, 13 kids?
Absolutely.
That's a nightmare.
And tromping through the house. I mean, it wasn't just they're in one room, but we're like parading. Like,
so did they not talk to the parents before they just pulled up? Like, did Ramona tell her classmates and then be like, oh, tell your mom I'm having a party? And then the kids told the parents and then...
That was dreadful parenting right there by all of those parents to not verify. But see, I think they were all just so desperate for a break. They were like, sounds great. I'll just drop them off.
And then the mom's like, okay, I see what's going on here. Well, let's just see what we can do. Like, you can't go get stuff from the store because all of our hair is wet. We have a ton of applesauce. How convenient.
I'm not touching the Fig Newtons. Worst party food ever. We thought those kids were weird when we were little. And so, like...
Well, Fig Newton really, I feel like, should have, have had some objections to how they're portrayed in the book. Because Ramona says they're full of worms and that none of the other kids will eat them. And I thought that was interesting that they used essentially a brand name and then maligned it in the book.
But I mean, who hasn't looked at a Fig Newton and went, what is that when you're little? I mean...
Yeah, mushed up figs are not pretty.
Right. And I don't think I knew what a fig was.
I definitely didn't. It's a suspiciously healthy looking cookie when you're a kid.
Exactly.
You're like, no, I'd rather have an Oreo.
But it seemed like they were down to eat them until she made that worms comment.
Right. Well, because they were passed out as cookies, right? Like, here's cookies and applesauce. And then they were happy to eat them until she told them they were made of worms.
I feel like, for accuracy, there should have been one kid that was like, I'm going to eat it anyway. I like eating worms. Like, there should have been like one kid who was
the
like not fazed by
kid
it.
would have been like, I am all in on the worms too.
Right. I think you all should put an asterisk here and then go back to How to Eat Fried Worms and go through that book.
Another classic.
That's a great one. Because that one I could relate to as well. I mean, I could relate to the worm part more than I can relate to the Fig Newton.
But it's so crazy because Ramona's like, ew, there are worms in here, but she's still like, you're going to eat these because this is my party and you're going to do what I tell you to do. Like, she was so determined. She's like, anything I tell y'all to do, y'all going to do. This is my party. And I think she was like kind of salty that her friends were having more fun at her party than she was.
Absolutely.
Well, it got out of her control, right? I mean, I think that's also a very 4-year-old thing, is like, if you play with a 4-year-old, they get these elaborate ideas of what they want to play, but then they want you to do exactly what they have in their head for you to do. So now you say this. Now you say that. It's this very like controlling, like they've scripted it out in their brain. So I thought that was like super accurate, that she would invite all of these kids and she had in her head, it's going to go this way and I'm going to be the star and everyone's going to do what I want them to do, because Howie doesn't do what I want him to do every day, but he'll have to because it's my party. And then they didn't, and she just like melted down.
Yeah, she and Howie kind of break up almost every book.
And
it's always something different. And that relationship I really appreciate, because my sister was the only girl that in our neighborhood and everyone else was boys. You know, having that kind of relationship with the little boys in the neighborhood was never, very rarely what I wanted to do. And dolls were definitely out. But I could see them. This is, worms and things, definitely a melding of the minds, if you will.
So I have to stop and note the fact that once again, in books we've been reading for the pod, wet hair is a plot point.
And this didn't make any sense either, though they didn't explicitly say, like, you will get sick or catch a chill and die with your wet hair. Instead, she said, well, you can't go out with wet hair. It's raining, which I didn't understand. Like, isn't that the best time to go out in the rain? You're already wet. That was very strange to me as well. But yes, it does seem to be a recurring issue in our books. Wet hair is extremely problematic.
Hashtag what hair struggles.
We're putting that on a button.
Nice. We should. It's March now. All right. We are moving on to the next book, which is Ramona Forever. Ramona is now 9 and Beezus is in middle school, and both girls are frustrated by having to stay with the Kemps after school while their mother is working. Money is tight with Mr. Quimby back in school to become a teacher and taking shifts at a frozen food warehouse. Howie's rich uncle Hobart comes to town, and the girls use this as an opportunity to escape Kemp camp and stay home alone after school. Life throws a series of curveballs at the girls. Their old cat Picky dies, their mother announces her pregnancy, and their father is struggling to find work as a teacher. Aunt Bee and Hobart unexpectedly decide to get married and move to Alaska, and there's a flurry of excitement trying to plan and host a wedding in just 2 weeks. Ramona and Beezus are bridesmaids, and Ramona has to save the day when the wedding ring goes flying during the ceremony. Mrs. Quimby gives birth to baby Roberta, and Mr. Quimby ultimately takes a job as a grocery store manager. Ramona learns that while life may not always turn out the way she expects it to, she is confident and capable that she can handle whatever comes her way. All right, let's dive into Ramona Forever. Ramona is now the age that Beezus was in the first book.
Which I think is so funny that she's the same age as Beezus was in the first book, because I think it really goes to show how being an older sibling gives you like an added sense of responsibility, just because Ramona still does not seem as responsible as Beezus felt in the first book. She's definitely grown, but she doesn't seem as responsible. Because you definitely see there are parts where Ramona looks back and she's like, when she's like watching Willa Jean and she's like, I remember when they thought of me as Ramona the Pest. So she tries to be understanding. It's almost like it's come full circle.
But she's still recognizably Ramona. Like, absolutely. Right.
Absolutely.
You still see her chaotic
Ramona's
nature.
Still doing many things that Beezus would never.
Right.
And I think that kind of speaks to Ramona's spirit. They are very different. That individuality that is allowed to kind of come out here, and why we love Ramona so much is because of this spirit that she has and carries, even when she's mature and older and winning at growing up, as she says, I think, towards the end.
How do we feel about Uncle Hobart?
When we were reading when he was first coming into town, like that first chapter, it took a couple of tries for me to get into it. I was like, this is boring. Why are we talking about this? I guess at the end, obviously, you see that they get married and do all that stuff. You see like the relevance of it. But in the beginning, I was just like, is he even really rich? Or do kids just think he's rich because he's bringing them gifts?
He did bring Willa Jean a camel saddle, which I thought was a pretty cool present.
And an accordion.
And an accordion, though it didn't last long.
And a unicycle. It's such an odd combination of gifts.
Which died an untimely death. He's like the archetype of like the quirky, weird, cool uncle.
Right.
He's the funkle.
Yeah.
He's just like out there doing irresponsible things because he doesn't have to deal with the mess when the unicycle goes poorly for the kid.
But overall he seemed kind of cool. I did feel like their whole getting married thing felt kind of random because it was just like they were still talking about her taking ski trips, so you were thinking that like she was taking ski trips with the Michael guy, and then the way they find out that he's dating the aunt is basically how he's like, yeah, my uncle has a girlfriend, she's a teacher. You know how many teachers there are out there? Like, why would that randomly be the connection? Even though they probably did remember that they were like, oh yeah, well, we went to high school together. I don't know. That thing just felt like it moved a little too fast. What was this the span of? Was this a span of weeks, months?
She was skiing with Michael every weekend, and then he was gone, and like a week later, they're announcing that they're eloping.
And then they're moving. It's
to Alaska.
Right.
Aunt Bee is the like Ramona of that family, so I can see it. Just go for it.
She totally would fall for a dude with like a unicycle.
She would.
And then he gets to pick out the dresses. I didn't have flower girls, but I just couldn't imagine my husband being the one picking out the dresses.
I did like watching him like go, oh, this is super simple. And then he's like, oh, no. It's not. That was kind of funny to me.
But I think he played it off a lot.
He handled
it. He did. It was he did forget the flowers for the church.
He forgot the flowers for the church.
But they were eating
other
ice
than
cream.
that, like he just got it done efficiently. I was like, dude's a pretty good wedding planner.
Yeah.
He got a church. He got a caterer. He got dresses.
I feel like in this book, a lot kind of happens in such a small amount of like pages. Like
It
also
does.
like the mom is like pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a lot happening behind the scenes because dad is
going to school.
He's going to school and he's like pulling these like crazy shifts in the frozen food warehouse to make ends meet. Mom's had to go back to work to make ends meet, which is why they're at the camps. And now she's pregnant on top of that. And it seems pretty clear from the subtext that this was not a planned pregnancy. Yeah, there's a lot going on for them financially. I did want to talk about the adult relationships in the book. We've talked a little bit about the two younger adults with Aunt Bee and Hobart, but the Quimbys, there's a really nice depiction of like the humanity of adults in this book. Like there are times where one of them gets a little bit snippy. It's very gentle in the text.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that they're stressed by the financial situation, that dad is stressed, like he's doodling dollar signs and babies when he's supposed to be studying.
Yeah.
Because he's worrying about like, how are we going to make ends meet? I really liked that they didn't tie everything up with a happily ever after bow by saying like, oh, now he's taking Aunt Bee's job teaching at the school. Because I think the way that the plot strung out, that was the sort of predictable path to take. And one of the girls, either Ramona or Beezus, says, great, now you can take Aunt Bee's job. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. And dad ultimately takes another blue collar job, doesn't get to do anything with this art teaching credential he got because they have to eat. I think there's a really good lesson in that. We have to make hard choices sometimes and we have to do what we need to do to get by. And that's okay. You can't let that like defeat you.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really positive thing that often doesn't get done in children's books, where you don't see disappointment as an end game. And that it very much was here. Like that had to be devastating for him to give up on this thing and be like, okay, I went and got these degrees and I'm still just, a stalker at a frozen food warehouse. I really liked that. I thought that that was really well done. And I think that that's important for kids to see that, realize that there's real value in their parents trying their best. That doesn't always mean we get everything we want, but there's value in the effort.
It's just enough realism to kind of make it feel true, because there's a lot of happiness and like wrapping things up, but it's not perfect. Like, Aunt Bee gets married, there's some sort of sweeping changes. Like you said, the dad didn't get the job he wanted. He had to like make a tough choice, and their cat died. I mean, that's a little earlier, but you kind of get the sense of like, it's life just kind of a mixed bag, even though there's happy things happening and people are growing up and good changes are occurring, but like there's still struggle and sadness and things are not perfect.
We also see that, I think, in the depiction of Mrs. Kemp. I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was a kind of surprisingly feminist notion for a children's book in the 1950s. And I don't mean feminist in a like, oh, rah, rah, let's go burn our bras kind of way. I mean in just an acknowledgement of the patriarchy and a system that really hurt a lot of women. So Mrs. Kemp doesn't like Ramona. And is she overtly doing things to tell her that? No, but Ramona's reading that off of her and she's upset by it. And she talks to her mom about it because she and Beezus want to not go to the camps anymore. They want to stay home alone and try to be, by themselves after school. And she brings up, Mrs. Kemp doesn't even like me. She'll be happy. Mrs. Quimby says, quote, women her age were brought up to keep house and take care of children, explained Mrs. Quimby. That's all they really know how to do. But now maybe she'd rather be doing something else. I thought that was a really surprising line that just kind of occurred in there that really acknowledges the humanity of this woman that really hasn't been depicted in a super positive way. I mean, I don't think anybody reads the book as like, I'd love to hang out with Mrs. Kemp or like, she's my favorite character. You don't. She seems frazzled. She seems kind of overwhelmed. She's pretty short with the kids. It doesn't seem like she wants to be doing that. And so to acknowledge that, she might have had dreams for herself too that were not this, but she's making it work. They need the money.
This is kind of a continuation of Mrs. Quimby going back to work, which happens, I think, in Ramona the Brave. Their father going back to school and going through school, and we see that in some of the other books, which we aren't going to talk about, is kind of an ongoing storyline in the continuation, because this is really books 1, and then we're talking about book 7. I think it's interesting to me that like it's laid out that Ramona and Beezus have this choice, that they've been with Howie's grandmother and that this is not something they enjoy. But, this was so that their mother could go back to work. And that was kind of understood. For a lot of kids of this era, it wasn't a choice. Both parents are at work. You're a latchkey kid. But I thought it was interesting that they had the choice, that they had this kind of moment of maturity of, like you said, I often, as an adult, don't always think about that decision, but only now as my sister is trying to make childcare decisions, like what that means when people want to go back to work and who, and we do have a generation of children now who the grandparents are much more involved. And in a lot of ways, I think it's good. My mother looks after my sister's daughter, and it's a great relationship. But it's not always, like you said, maybe she had other things that she wants to do. And kind of looking with longing at that generation that was allowed to kind of go out into the workforce. And that wasn't a dream that they were able to realize. But that's also the generation that you see going back to school and going to kind of further that. So I think it's a very adult topic and a very much so child book. But I think, like you said, it's a very interesting, kind of somber in some ways. But I just love the way that dovetails into Ramona and Beezus trying to, act mature and bear this responsibility so that they can have this freedom. But it also, in some ways, it's almost like Ramona's gift to Howie's grandmother. I'm out of your hair now.
One thing that stood out to me, I guess was interesting, was they make Beezus makes the comment about how, she doesn't go to her friend's house after school anymore because one of her friends made a comment about how her dad needs to go and get a real job. One, this is so messed up. And it's funny, I think a lot of these books that we've discussed, talk about kids making commentary on parents' professions and what they do. And I'm trying to think, as a kid, I don't know if we knew all that about our friends' parents. But I guess it kind of just depends on what kind of community you grow up in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was well aware of what my friends' parents did everybody was all up in everybody's business, I think.
Yeah, I think, and too, you could tell by, the clothes you wore and what you had or what you didn't have. That really said a lot about what your parents, and the difference at the time, I think, between, if your mom was a teacher was huge compared to if your parents were more blue collar. And what you could afford. And
here, so Mr. Quimby loses his job in earlier books, and then he ends up being underemployed, taking these jobs as a cashier and a stocker. And Mrs. Quimby has to go back to work. And I think at that time in that neighborhood, her having to go back to work would certainly have been something that neighbors would have talked about.
That makes sense.
And that it would have reflected poorly on Mr. Quimby that his wife had to go back to work, especially now that she's pregnant. Though at this point in the story, I guess Pamela, was that the friend's name, wouldn't have known that. But that would have only increased the talk. It's
right.
Man, you can't even provide for your family. Look, your wife's here in her uniform for work, hugely pregnant. So I think that would have been something that a child conceivably would have heard her parents talking about. Another thing that to me read as kind of oof, she's pregnant, Mrs. Quimby is. And there's multiple instances in the book where she passes on dessert.
That stood out to me too.
And so at one point it says dessert had been eaten by everyone except Mrs. Quimby, who was careful about calories. I have real concerns about dieting during your pregnancy. That seems really bad. But I know that for the time period, women were told oh, you should only try to gain this much during your pregnancy. And from what I could tell looking it up, it was quite a low number, especially since Mrs. Quimby is described as always being slender. They said something 20 pounds, doctors would really try to keep women to, and of course, male doctors almost certainly, trying to keep a woman's figure by telling her don't gain during your pregnancy.
It just seems so unrealistic.
To me, it's wild. I gained 50 pounds with each of my pregnancies because you do. I mean, half of that was just water weight.
Well, and I think they're all trying so very hard not to upset her, as if this one, the cat dying, for instance, would just suddenly send her into some sort of the anxiety that they're feeling. Can't upset mom, as if mom is some sort of bomb that's about to go off or something. It just really is a interesting portrayal, I think.
They point out that she's clearly like tired and a little bit overwhelmed. I'm like, she probably needs the extra calories, or maybe she just needs to be able to have dessert. You know,
You're not yourself when you're hungry, Dorothy. Eat a Snickers. Right. Even when the dad was kind of worried and stressed out about school, like his go-to thing was to make jokes, and Ramona didn't like that, and I thought that was kind of funny.
They're portrayed in a very real and positive way. It's two people that they're good parents, but they're not Ozzie and Harriet good parents. You know, they are having some struggles, but they're trying their best in very healthy ways. I think that models something positive for kids. Like generally, I feel like these books hold up surprisingly well, given that they were written in the 50s. There's not a lot in them that really dates them.
there was a hint. I kind of wondered, because they said, well, of course, when she has Roberta, she'll have to quit her job. And I kind of wonder, like, that could happen now, to be honest, sometimes for all sorts of reasons. But I do kind of wonder, like, how much of that was just books from a child's perspective. So maybe there were adult discussions about it that we didn't see, potentially. But it just seemed kind of understood. Well, in the 50s, it was a lot harder to work after you had a kid.
Well, and I think the thing that, for me, dates it a little bit is that I just don't meet these kids anymore. I think that what is missing is the things that we have filled, technology and things like that, and creates a very different childhood. Looking back on this book, I feel a lot of joy and everything, because there's this sense of, freedom and, remembering what it was like to discover things and ride my bike and do all those things. But I don't know that kids have that kind of freedom now. I mean, I think they're not supervised at all, and that's that helicopter parent type mentality. And I think that is the only thing you can kind of look on it with a lot of nostalgia.
I mean, I think a lot of that is also, it can be regional or even hyper local. We talk a lot about helicopter parents, and they certainly exist. Kids running around and playing at playground with friends or in the neighborhood unsupervised, that still happens.
Yeah, it does around here, yes.
It certainly does with my kids, because in my neighborhood, that's okay. It would be much harder in other neighborhoods, but I think that some of it is specific to where people are. I mean, certainly we have, in particular in Maryland, there are a lot of rules about like what age kids can be to look after other kids and how old you can be to stay home alone. And I think there's still some relevance to, kids having some degree of freedom. A kid could go outside, but is that the choice they make? Right? Maybe not, because they're going to be on a screen instead. So I think that is something that's a good point. The lack of screens. Though I guess there is the mention though, like at the one point where it's like Beezus says something like they're not watching themselves, they're watching TV about the latchkey kids that she knows.
Right.
That's that time period's version of that, I suppose. There's really no mention of racial diversity in this book at all, which is almost certainly accurate to Portland, Oregon in the 50s.
Yeah, very much so.
But I do think that there's some subtle stuff in there about class.
Very much so. I mean, this is definitely, this kind of blue collar kind of, but there is like that creep towards, going back to school, wanting better lives. Like, there is that kind of sense of striving and ambition that is present, I think, in a blue collar kind of neighborhood. But you do see, like when they talk about the wealthy uncle and, the things he's able, he kind of introduces these objects into their lives that they wouldn't have normally bought for themselves or even had. So, I mean, there's that.
Right. Well, and like he goes to the store and he's just like, put it on my card.
Like a unicycle.
And I think that's a little bit interesting, just in contrast to Mom counting out the $3 bills for Beezus to go to the library to pay for the book. For context, in the Ramona series, the sort of trajectory of Mr. Quimby and his job struggles, when we first meet them in Beezus and Ramona, he's working for the utility company. He and Ramona's mom met when they were in college. She got pregnant with Beezus before he was able to finish his degree that he was working on at the time. So he made do, as many people do make do, and found a job. And he's found a pretty good blue-collar job with the utility company. Then we see, and I think Ramona and her father, he loses that job. And you see him, standing in the unemployment line. You see sort of this decline of those types of jobs, industry jobs, union jobs. And then he ends up having to just take whatever he can find, which is being a checker at the grocery store. He's taking these minimum wage jobs. And, how does that impact him as the man of the house? And so you see kind of he's struggling with that and he's down about things, but he's going to keep grinding. He clearly hates the job, which I think is also an interesting thing that often doesn't get into children's books. An important thing where it's like, yeah, you need a paycheck. Your job might suck, but like you need to eat. By the end of this, he's tried to sort of finish that degree and pursue this dream, and it just never gets actualized. We usually see women characters portrayed in this sort of, is it enough vein, where it's like, you can't have it all. But really, in the Ramona books, Mr. Quimby is the one who can't have it all. You can't have this family and this career as an artist that you wanted. You have to make all these hard choices. So I think it's brave of Cleary to have sort of written that arc for him. He's a good man. He's a good father. He's a good husband. But he struggles through every single book. There are struggles on the employment front. That was a fairly bold choice for her to make in books for little kids. I thought that was kind of an interesting, a different model of masculinity than we've seen in some of the other books that we've read, because we really have only had either men who are providers and good providers, and the American Girl books in particular, or in Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, or we have men who are just a train wreck, like Johnny, Tree Grows in Brooklyn, or like Nellie's uncle. You only have these poles. And I think Mr. Quimby is a much more nuanced depiction of masculinity than we get in a lot of these books. I don't know why that is.
Maybe a more realistic, I think. Yeah. He's definitely a very genuinely, you recognize Mr. Quimby. Yeah. He's not a stranger. He's someone you probably knew a lot of Mr. Quimbys, maybe not to the degree that we know intimate details, and I think he's neither always the knight in shining armor and perfect and everything, but he's perfect for them and fits very well. But I agree. For me growing up, I was in a community that did have a lot of broken homes. So for a lot of kids, having books that even had parents that were together, my own family was, your typical nuclear, but I had a father who was a little bit more distant, I would say, than Mr. Quimby. And so, but he's definitely relatable and definitely more of a realistic character than probably many of the ones that we've seen. And you can recognize, I can recognize my parents in them, in that desire to give us what we needed, but also in that distance that they were busy having working parents. And, but you also knew that by your behavior, you helped them in a lot of ways. And so there is that push-pull that I think maybe in some ways that kind of socioeconomic situation makes you more aware and more mature, maybe faster than. And that they were tired. Right. I feel like that's also such a good, accurate portrayal of parenthood in this. Were there any other things we wanted to hit during discussion? I like Algie. Oh, Algie. Yes, the baby being called Algie. I mean, it's such a better name than Roberta in so many ways. Sorry, Roberta. I'm sure you're listening somewhere. But I mean, when you got Ramona and Beezus, Algie's just kind of fits, There was a Goodreads comment that said, I don't know why they were so hard on the dad. Quentin Quincy Quimby would have been such a cool name. I liked when Ramona was banished from the maternity ward because she was too germy, that doctor came up and wrote her a literal prescription for attention. Yeah, that was really cute. But that was the thing. I remember when my sister was, I just thought that doctor was pretty great because they were so worried about, I think in some ways they still are with newborns. I don't know. Each episode, our luminous literarian and frequent co-host Hawa will provide miscellany and insights from our book. It's time for Hawa's Headspace. All this talk about siblings has me thinking a lot about the shenanigans I got into with my siblings growing up.
All right. Wait, what again? Oh my God. My name is Alpha. I'm 14 years old and I'm Hawa's younger brother.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm Hannah's sister. I'm 2 years younger than her, and we also have a brother who's 7 years younger than me.
Okay, let's start over. Hi, my name is Selena.
Hi, my name is Heidi.
And we are darling sisters.
My name is Matthew, and I am Heather's younger brother.
My name's Devin. I'm related to Kelsey. I'm her younger sister.
Okay, first of all, this is my interview where I.
Okay, introduce yourself.
Kelsey, you're interrupting. Oh my God, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10, annoying.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how annoying was I growing up?
As your younger sister, I think it's very clear that my job was, and I think I performed pretty well at being the more annoying sister. I don't recall it, but I understand when I was around 2, I would actually actively bite you.
I would say 5 or 4.
In the moment, I would used to think 6.
You weren't really that annoyed by me? Oh, no, that's so sweet.
Don't take it like that, though.
I want to say a solid 3.
Oh.
Yeah, you weren't that annoying. I mean, you're annoying, but it was helpful.
When I was a child, I probably thought you hovered around an 8, but I think in reality, I was the more annoying one, so...
Well, you were just a figment, so that wasn't your fault.
You did tell me that I was a figment of your imagination, which was slightly annoying.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how great of a sister am I?
10.
10.
Throughout school, you helped us navigate, with classes and just helping me get through high school, applying to college. And then when I was actually in college, there was a lot of things I didn't understand. I mean, isn't that what an older sister is supposed to do?
Scale of 1 to 10. How great of a sister am I? 10?
Oh my God. Yeah, I would definitely say a 10.
A 10?
Are you just saying that because you want me to keep cash apping you money?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
You're a great sister. Thanks. You were always, I give you a 10. I always looked up to you, through high school and whatnot. I tried to basically follow in the same footsteps as you as best as I possibly could. And you were ultimately the one that encouraged me to pursue music. And I always took your advice because it was always sound advice. And so, yes, great sister.
I want to say Hannah was the oldest child. So given that our parents made all of the mistakes on her, I want to give her a solid 6.5. And that we've both been a lot closer to each other more as of late. And I think that number is a lot closer to 10 now.
Okay, describe our dynamic.
We'll pick up the phone often and be like, hey, this is going on. Hey, this is going on. We don't really fight ever anymore or disagree or bicker. No, sometimes we bicker.
I was going to say.
No, we do be bickering. I'll be like, stop telling me what to do. And you'll be like, you asked for advice. And I'm like, my bad.
Then you hang up on me. And then tomorrow you call me and you're like, okay, here's what's going on now.
Take. No, but I would say the dynamic overall, it's kind of like Gilmore Girls, except for the fact that you're not my mom.
I don't think I'm like Lorelai though. Am I Rory and you're Lorelai?
Probably. Oh, 100%.
And we have a great connecting bond.
Do we really?
No, I was lying.
You always wanted to read and kind of have time to yourself, and I wanted to do anything in my power to interrupt your reading and your time to yourself. Probably toward the end of your time in high school, you started treating me a little bit more like a real person and started including me in a few social activities and whatnot. And so I think that was when our relationship started to get closer and better. And then, it sounds weird, but then when you went away to college, we managed to actually, I think, get even closer.
I remember when I went away to college at 18, struggling a whole lot less than some of the kids who had never had to share rooms and negotiate those kinds of challenges of cohabiting and living in a space.
So what I'm hearing is that the chaos that I contributed to and we made together inoculated you against roommate shock in college.
Well, you were the cowpox to the future smallpox that I then had to suffer resistance to.
There's things that can upset me very easily, and I feel like you're always the one to then keep me level-headed.
But yeah, same. I feel like you're the older one who's the wiser. I forgot the word in English.
What is it in Spanish?
Consejos. What is it?
Advice.
Advice. You give advice to us like when we need it, because either you've been there, done that, or yeah.
Or I pretend I've been there, done that.
How am I different at home versus in public?
Hannah can be very private about certain aspects of her life, and it's only a very kind of close-knit circle of people who she really gets close to, and maybe she lets herself be a little bit more vulnerable to those people.
Are you afraid of being mean or something?
No, I was gonna say like quirky. Like you're like all excited. You'll talk about something and you'll just be like so excited. Like it'll be like, I don't know, like a statue somewhere, and you're like, yo, let's go check this out.
Okay, so we need to go back because you said Howard at home is more Howard. What does that mean?
You're just you.
What does that mean?
You're just Howard. That's what that means.
Is that a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing. You're just Howard.
Okay, so what does that mean for the people who don't know me?
Well, if you know Howard, then you just act like Howard. I don't know. I can't explain it.
Oh my God, you're the
You
worst.
just act like you.
And it's funny because we always think, why are you so loud? And everyone's like, she's quiet.
I know.
And we're like, no, she's loud. Like, this is loud for us.
This is loud for us.
Would we be friends if we were not related?
I would say yeah, I think so. I mean, you're like a little boring sometimes. Okay. You'd probably be like the friend that I like call like once a month and I'd be like, how's your life? And then you update me on it and then we just do it again the next month. Like you wouldn't be like my rah-rah shushkumbah, like let's go out every weekend and do stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like we hang out in different circles. So like it would be hard for us to meet each other. But that's not to say we wouldn't get along if we did happen to meet like at work or something. We're not going to go out to the bars.
Yeah, like if we were at the bars, we wouldn't have sat at like the same tables or like met. Yeah.
I'd be at home and you'd be just getting there.
Again, it would have depended on when in the timeline of life it would have been, because in grade school, absolutely not. You would have advised me. I think by the time we got to high school, had we been in high school together, I think yes, we probably would have been. We would have been choir kids.
I mean, I feel like yeah, right? I think maybe.
But I don't know. I feel like we have similar dispositions, but different personalities. But that's because we're different in our
zodiac signs.
Yes, in our zodiac signs. But I was going to say in order of birth. So as the oldest, I was going to probably be the one that's more responsible. As the middle sister, I feel like that's a catch-all because I don't think all middle siblings are the same. And then as the youngest, I think you're definitely the funniest of us.
I almost think it would really depend on how we had met and whether the environment was one that was one of these shared situations where, I don't know, it brought out the fact that Hannah is a quirky, hilarious weirdo who sometimes covers herself in plastic spiders posing in some sort of death scene or wears eyeball masks, and I like to dress up in shark costumes or dinosaur costumes and do other weird stuff.
I don't think so. You're a 28-year-old, so I'm 14. We wouldn't be friends. I don't know how we would.
Okay, honestly, you're not wrong. Okay, but what if I was your age? Would we be friends? You're thinking too hard. I'm going to take that as a no.
Yeah, probably not. Wait, I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds like a no. Okay, yeah. Thanks. Thanks for your time, Alpha.
Do you have anything else you want to share about Sisterhood?
Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Great movie, by the way.
Not book. That's the key difference between us.
Yeah, see, that is the difference between us. I don't read, and my sister is a librarian, so I don't know that we would have been friends. I take it back.
I was gonna say, the famous quote, "Sisters by chance, friends by choice."
Okay, so for today's game segment, we're going to try to take this quiz as Ramona, and it's called Everyone is an Obscure Portlandia Character, and this personality test will reveal which you are. We have to, do a shout out for Beverly Cleary's hometown of Portland. The first question is, a guy in the street calls you pretty. You tell him to seek God, give him a lesson in feminist history, tell him no thank you, sir, tell him about your favorite band, giggle, or berate him.
I think Ramona would say no thank you, sir.
Yeah, with some like force behind it. It wouldn't just be like, oh, no, thank you. It'd be like, no, thank you. Stop.
Well, because she keeps like trying to sort of, well, with Uncle Hobart, like how she keeps like, so are you thinking of moving back to Saudi Arabia?
Real subtle.
Yeah, at least on surface it would sound polite, but like the tone would clearly not be.
I like that one. Everyone okay with that option?
Yeah.
Okay. It's Friday night. You can be found doing homework, fawning over bands at the hottest venue, giggling, reading the Bible, making plans to smash the patriarchy, snuggled up with your boyfriend in your bed sweater. What's a bed sweater?
I think Ramona's going to smash the patriarchy.
I was literally going to say that.
Of these choices, that's the most. And I mean, I can see Ramona doing it. If your friends had to describe you in one word, it would be entrepreneurial, responsible, intense, unique, smart, passionate.
I think Ramona's kind of intense.
I think she's kind of intense.
She's
too.
intense. She's also unique, but I think intense is a good descriptor of her as well.
Yes.
She's a lot.
Your perfect date consists of, I've never been on a date, maybe one day, going to a protest, talking about music, brainstorming new business ventures, giggling. Last choice is I don't date by choice.
I like that I've never been on a date maybe one day because she's clearly still a child. And she's not at the age of like Beezus.
She and Howie
have this relationship.
Really?
Yeah, they smash bricks together. In their brick factory game.
Yeah, I like that one too.
I've never been on a date.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Your favorite subject in school was recess, music, business, religion, art, and math.
Recess?
I feel like recess.
Yeah.
Or art, though. I mean, she did really go.
She was artistic and she did music. You know, she loved that harmonica and her parade.
And the marching band parade. I don't know.
But I feel like you can kind of do all those things at recess, too.
Yes, recess it is. Finally, what would you name your child? Is Bendix an option?
Algie.
Robert, Gloria, Peter, Francis, Persephone, Susanna.
I think she would go with Susanna. Or Persephone.
Persephone does sound like really beautiful, but I think Susanna is the right like combination of beautiful but weird.
It's like a little bit quirky and like off the beaten path, which is Ramona.
Yeah, I vote for Susanna.
All right. Ramona, her obscure Portlandia character is Ashby. It says giggle in the description. That's not very satisfying as a result.
Could someone, because I am not familiar with Portlandia, so could someone give a little bit of context to this like result?
Portlandia stereotypes. I have seen it, but I don't remember this character.
Well, it did say obscure.
Yeah, they weren't kidding about the obscure.
Giggles. Like what?
We never picked Giggles.
Literally never. Well, no, some of the ones we
result?
picked probably gave Giggles vibes.
So Ashby is a real person from Portland.
Oh, really?
In real life. She makes appearance as herself, which is a ghostly, oddly feminine entity with a bobbing weather balloon tied to her ponytail. In Portlandia, she plays a character of herself. I think that captures Ramona.
Yep. Ramona
yeah,
would
I
do
mean,
that.
I think she is a free spirit who laughs a lot.
Agreed.
So I think that's fine for Ramona.
Each episode, we ask whether our book passes the Bechdel test. Bechdel test asks whether a work features two female characters who talk to each other about something that doesn't involve men or boys. So does it?
Yes.
I think they both definitely pass.
Yeah. We have plenty of conversations about Beezus and Ramona together. We have the conversation about Mrs. Kemp watching kids. We've got lots of stuff in there.
They talk about a dead cat.
Yes, poor Picky.
R.I.P. Well, that's it for this episode of These Books Made Me. Join us next time when we'll discuss a book where the boys at school are obsessed with mountains. If you think you know which book we're tackling next, drop us a tweet. We're at PGCMLS on Twitter and hashtag These Books Made Me.